My name is Clara Estevez. I am 54 years old. My hair is a little gray. My hands are marked by life and my eyes are still open to astonishment. I was never one to give up easily. Before I continue, I ask you to give a like to the video and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything and you help me to continue bringing you more stories. Thank you. Let's continue. Although for many years I did it without realizing it. Surrendered to a soulless marriage, to a comfortable but empty routine, to a love that became a shadow. I was married for 32 years to Ramon. A meticulous naval engineer, a practical man, always involved in his plans, his calculations, his silences. At first I fell in love with his security, his orderly world. I was 22 and he was 34, and I felt protected. With time I discovered that it was not protection, but confinement disguised as stability. Our daughter, Nuria, went to live in Germany a decade ago. Since then, our house has been filled with a thick silence, like a fog that does not let you see or feel. Ramon and I ate without talking, slept in separate beds. We shared a roof and no illusions. Until one Sunday afternoon, while I was watering my geraniums on the terrace, I felt an impulse that pierced me completely. I don't want to die here. I don't want to be just another shadow in this gray house. It wasn't a fight, there was no screaming, just a serene truth. I was leaving. With my savings, I bought a modest but bright house in a village on the Andalusian coast. Puerto Azul, where the breeze smells of salt and the walls are still whitewashed every spring. I took with me the essentials. Some clothes, my books, a box with pins that I hadn't used since I was young, and Greta, my tabby cat. She had been my faithful companion for 8 years. The first night in that house I slept with the windows open, listening to them alone as if they were lullabies. Yes, I cried, but I also cried. I cried, yes, but I also felt, for the first time in many years, that the future existed again. A week after settling in Puerto Azul, while walking through the historic center with my wide-brimmed hat and a blue dress I hadn't worn for years, I stopped in front of a charming library. The window was decorated with antique glass bottles, small oak barrels, and a chalkboard that read, "Good wines are not drunk, they are remembered." I entered out of curiosity, attracted by the smell of wood, of fermented grapes, of time well kept. The place was bathed in a dim, warm light. In a corner, I saw a man with a glass in his hand, examining the color of the wine against the window, as if looking for answers in the reflections of the glass. It was Adrien. "If you want something soft, I recommend the Food Merlot," he said without looking at me, as if he already knew what I was looking for. I laughed in surprise. "Do you have anything for someone who has just given up 30 years of life?" Then he did look at me. His eyes were gray. Deep. Like clouds trailing storms from the past. A well-groomed beard and a white shirt rolled up, revealing strong arms. Of a man who has worked with barrels, with earth, with truth. "Then he needs an honest wine," he replied. "One that doesn't promise sweetness, but doesn't hide its character either." He offered me a glass, I drank it. It was dry, robust, with notes of plum and smoke. Like him, we sat and chatted. He told me about how he had left Madrid after becoming a widow. Of his love for wine, of the stories he had heard in other people's glasses. I told him about painting, about silence, about my cat. The conversation was like the wine. Slow, warm, enveloping. Before saying goodbye, he handed me a small bottle. To toast to the woman who had decided to live again. That night I dreamed of him. Not as a lover, but as someone looking at me from across a table with a glass in his hand and a knowing smile. A week later, it was me who returned to the library. A month after meeting Adrien, while strolling through a local nursery looking for plants for my backyard garden, I literally bumped into a man carrying huge facets in his arms. "Sorry," I said, touching his shoulder. When his shoulder, he turned around. He was about 50 years old, dark, thin, and with a look so peaceful that it seemed to me that he came from another world. "Don't worry," he said in a low voice, as if he didn't want to disturb the wind. It was Simon, the nursery manager. Unlike Adrien, who spoke with passion and rhythm, Simon was a man of few words, but his every gesture was full of meaning. He helped me choose flowers for the garden. Lavender, jasmine, rosemary. He explained how to plant them, how to speak softly to them. Days later, I hired him to help me redesign the backyard. He came twice a week. He worked quietly, whistling softly, while Greta watched him from the window. I watched him from my easel, trying to capture with my pixels that calm he exhaled effortlessly. One afternoon, while I was watering the jasmines and he was pruning the rose bushes, he asked me, "Do you think plants know when someone is in bloom again?" I didn't know what to answer. But that night, my dreams smelled of damp earth and warm skin under the sun. Summer in Puerto Azul brought with it a special energy. The streets were filled with tourists, improvised fairs, street musicians, and food aromas. I was beginning to feel part of that swaying. Of that quiet flow, where every day seemed like a new blank page. It was a July afternoon. While I was walking along the boardwalk, asleep in her special backpack, when I saw him. He was sitting on a wrought iron bench. Barefoot, with a sketchbook on his legs and his fingers stained with charcoal. I glanced sideways at him, not intending to interrupt him, but it was he who spoke to me. "If I may say so, madam, your cat seems wiser than many people I know." King me. He looked up. He was in his early 50s, with long hair in a bun. A few days' beard and the green eyes of a curious child. "Her name is Greta," I told him. "And she probably is." That's how I met Alvaro, nomadic artist, painter, muralist, lover of storms and midnight breakfasts. Born in Cadiz, but a citizen of the world, he had lived in Morocco, in Lisbon, in Rome. Now he spent the summer in Puerto Azul doing commission portraits, and painting murals for bars in exchange for wine and a bed. "And you?" he asked me. "What do you do in this corner of the world with the look of the ocean?" "I'm learning to live," I answered. It was the beginning of a sparkling, unpredictable connection. Alvaro was the opposite of the other two men in my life. Where Adrien was order and elegance, he was chaos and freedom. Where Simon was serenity and contemplation, he was impulse and laughter. He led me to paint with my hands, to dance barefoot on the beach, to sing aloud in the middle of the street. His first kiss came without warning, between laughter and paint stains. And it was just like him. Vibrant, unexpected, full of color. She loved Adrien for his depth, for the nights by the fireplace talking about wine, philosophy and old wounds. I loved Simon for his warm silence. For the way he offered me flowers without saying a word. For the way he looked at me as if I were a tree in bloom. I loved Alvaro for the laughter, for the wildness, for the way he would disarm me with a single glance. And then I realized, I loved all three of them, and I was afraid. Fear of losing them, fear of being rejected, fear of not being understood. I would spend nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was crazy, if I was selfish, if I was playing with fire. Wondering if I was crazy, if I was selfish, if I was playing with fire. How do you explain to the world that your heart doesn't fit in one story? Until one night I sat facing the sea with Greta asleep in my lap. And I decided that the truth, no matter how painful or absurd it seemed, was the only thing that could save me from myself. I had to ask to speak to them. I made the decision at dawn on a Tuesday. I set up a table in the garden, with ceramic tableware that I had painted myself. I placed 3 crystal glasses, freshly baked bread, fruits and fresh flowers. Everything looked like a magazine postcard, but inside me, anxiety served as a pot without a lid. I invited the 3 separately with a simple excuse. "I want to share something with you." It is important. The first to arrive was Adrien, punctual as always, with a bottle of chilled white wine under his arm. He was followed by Simon, with his serene gait, and a small basil plant in his hands. Finally Alvaro arrived, with tousled hair, an old t-shirt and a lopsided smile. The three of them looked at each other, somewhat puzzled. They looked at me. The silence was so thick that Greta from the window stopped howling. I took a deep breath. I want to tell them something. Something that is not easy to say, not easy to hear. None of them said anything, so I continued. All three have been part of this rebirth I am living. All three have given me something I thought I had lost, love. And yes, I have fallen in love. The world stopped for a second. Adrien looked down. Simon closed his eyes. Alvaro raised his eyebrows, like someone who has just seen an abstract work of art without fully understanding it. It's not a game. I said. I'm not asking for permission or understanding. Just truth. I could no longer hide it. I'd rather lose them with honesty than keep them half-heartedly with lies. Seconds passed that seemed like hours. It was Simon who spoke first. I already sensed it. Love is not a property. Flowers grow without asking permission from the sun. Then Adrien raised his glass, with a bitter smile. I never imagined sharing you, but I also don't want to lose the only thing that has made me feel alive in years. And Alvaro simply laughed as always. What a neat story, this deserves a whole mural. We toasted. With nerves, with doubts, but also with respect. That night none of us slept over, but none of us said goodbye. The following days were like walking on a glass bridge. Each step required care, patience, dialogue. Not every moment was smooth. There was jealousy, insecurities, awkward silences, but there was also something new. The willingness not to close the door. None of them left. And little by little, like building a house without blueprints, we began to imagine a different way of loving each other. We created rules, each one would have his own space in the house. Adrien in the cellar converted into a reading room. Simon in the greenhouse, Alvaro in a room full of fabrics, princes and canvas. I did not belong to Soma, but I shared with everyone. Some nights we cooked together. Others we dined separately. Sometimes I slept alone. Other times, cuddled. We learned to listen to each other, to respect each other. To recognize when one needed more and when the other had to wait. The neighbors whispered, of course. But I walked through town with my head held high. I didn't owe explanations. Love, I understood. It doesn't need approval. 18 months have passed since that confession under the lemon tree in my garden. The life we lead is not perfect, but it is profoundly real. Over time, we stopped talking about rules. And we began to live with natural agreements, built with respect, empathy, and above all, love. Adrien became the guardian of the quiet nights. We shared readings. Warm teas and long silences full of complicity. He has a special way of holding me when the world overwhelms me, of offering precise words, as if each sentence of his had centuries of wisdom. Simon, with his firm hands and his vegetable patience. He taught me that love can also be cultivated. I discovered him whispering small things to me as we planted a new lemon tree together. He doesn't need to make big declarations. His love is constant, fertile and silent. Alvaro is still storm and fire. With dancing in the kitchen at 3 a.m, we drink red wine while we paint on the living room floor. And sometimes we say things to each other without filters. He's the one who reminds me that I can still lose my composure, scream, cry and then laugh until my belly hurts. Each one of them loves me differently, and I love them back. We learn to share without competing, to leave space without disappearing, to look at each other without fear. There is no fixed schedule. There are moments, there are agreements. There are days when I am more with one and days when I need the three of us close, just having coffee and talking about how the sky was that morning. Sundays are usually our common days. We cook together. Alvaro sings. Simon prepares artisan bread. Adrien selects the music. I watch, with a smile that is no longer that of a woman who has given up something, but of someone who has taken it all back. Epilogue. A letter from the past. Dear Clara, from 5 years ago, do you remember when you thought your life was over? When you cried silently in front of the mirror, believing that no one would ever look at you with desire or tenderness again? Remember the endless nights. The cold coffee. The unspoken words. You were wrong. What seemed like the end was just a moving of the soul. Today you have 3 companions who do not bind you, but embrace you. You have a garden that blooms. A house with windows always open. And a heart that is not afraid to love with all its body, mind and spirit. You have built a home without blueprints, a love without cages, a life without an expiration date. And if someone asks you if you can love 3 people at the same time, you just smile and answer. When the soul has many rooms, love does not divide, it multiplies. Thank you for not giving up. With clear love.